Welcome to On the Line. I'm Christine Williams, coming up for discussion on our Viewpoints Hour. Changes to the immigration process being criticized. A look at the logic of a total handgun ban and criticisms about the charity practice of shipping Halloween candy overseas. Stay tuned. And these are the issues we're presenting today to our Viewpoints guests for commentary. Changes to the immigration process drawing in some criticism for being too picky in placing a heavier emphasis on job skills. We keep hearing about a handgun ban as a solution to urban violence. Is this the cure? And a program giving away Halloween candy to the less fortunate children overseas. Critics are calling it a not-so-sweet idea. Now let's meet our Viewpoints guests. Robert Metz is president of the Freedom Party of Ontario, and Allan Horton is senior pastor with the Meeting House in Oakville and a lawyer by trade. And you, the viewer, you are our third guest. Feel free to call in at any time with any of your comments about any one of the subject matters we're dealing with today. And that brings us to the first. Take a look at the headline. It's called New Criteria Alarm Immigrants. And I'm going to start by actually saying, I'm not sure who's actually alarmed here, but the article points out that some immigrants, okay, some are a little bit concerned because, according to the article, the Conservative government put out new criteria making it, I don't want to say more difficult for immigrants, but adding in more specifications, let's put it that way, when it comes to skills coming into our country. So the question that we're asking you, our audience, because we want to hear your feedback on it, what do you think about immigrants coming into this country? Do you think we should just leave it wide open to whoever needs to come in, wants to come in? Do you think we should have strict criteria in keeping with our market system today? Let us know how you feel about it. And I'm going to actually start with you, Allan, on this one. The article, it's quite vague. But this issue has been raised before, that the Conservative government, and this needs to also be understood, that under the Conservatives, the waiting time has now been decreased for immigrants and refugees coming into the country. However, when it comes to the immigration process, highlighted in this article, we're expecting immigrants to have more skill coming into the country. And do you think that's fair? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I hadn't heard the statistic that you just mentioned, that it actually has reduced the waiting time, of the Conservative government has reduced that waiting time, which would be a good thing. Simply keeping people in a limbo is a difficult thing. And having some kind of border controls, again, in your introduction you were saying, well, should we just open it up wide open for anybody who wants to come? Part of being a sovereign country is controlling your own borders, making sure that things are carefully done and so on. But having said that, most of the article actually went through carefully and a number of people who have fairly high skills and yet can't work in those areas.
Which is very interesting.
That has been an ongoing issue. It also doesn't say what those new criteria are. So if criteria for coming into the country is now tighter and more difficult to actually achieve, not knowing exactly what those are, it's a little difficult to comment on that specifically, but the point of the article being there are many immigrants who are just simply, I don't want to say wasting away, but that's a little harsh, a little overstated, because whatever they're doing is useful and valuable. But to have accountants being clerks, ward clerks, for the rest of their lives,
which is what we're seeing happening.
To be a problem.
And that seems to be another area altogether, that in fact we do have a lot of well-qualified immigrants coming in here and they can't seem to find jobs, which is interesting because the article starts out by criticizing that we're expecting greater job skills, but at the same time highlighting individuals that come in skilled and can't seem to find jobs. But I'm going to ask you personally, before I go over to you, Robert, Allan, do you have a problem with this? If a government, broadly speaking, says, look, we want certain job skills in our country, do you really find it unfair? Given the competitive economy?
I don't think I would call it unfair, but a government always has to control which people come in, and that if it's not selective in some fashion, it can become a burden on literally everybody else, including the immigrant community, and that part I think is fine. And to say, well, in our present economy, I don't think the immigration rules can flex fast enough to change with a changing economy. What we're going through right now has happened practically overnight, even though it's a long-term process that actually built to it, but it feels like it's happened fast.
Yes.
So I think it has the potential to be unfair, and I think that I'm generally much more personally in favor of more liberal immigration policies than restrictive ones, just on that level, but some, absolutely.
Okay, how do you feel about this, Robert?
In principle, I agree with Allan entirely. I'm basically a free immigration type of person. However, if you look at the type of immigration we had, say, 20 years ago and what we've got today, that was before, maybe 30 years ago. We really became a socialized nation where immigrants can actually become a threat to your country because they don't come with skills, or they come unskilled and they become part of the dependent class that everyone else has to work to support. That was never a condition that existed in North America until the last 20, 25 years or so. So immigration was never a threat because anybody that came was self-sufficient. Didn't matter whether they were rich or poor, didn't matter whether they were skilled because they could acquire the skills. And the markets were free enough that you could get a job or make a job yourself. And I think largely what we're talking about today is less an immigration problem than it is an employment problem, an employment monopoly problem. Look at the areas where they all talk about having problems in the medical field, where you've got a medical monopoly, where you don't, not even in insurance can we have competition. In education, in the higher professions that are very regulated by government and by the professions themselves because they don't want competition. That's normal.
That's right.
So that's where the problem originates, and I think that you would have more what would you say, better use of human capital if you allowed that capital to flow just like you do with money, to go to its most productive places. And I think, people are always talking too about getting a job, which is an employment-employer relationship. That means you're depending upon another person to provide you with that opportunity. And we forget that, if you go back to 1900, about 20% of people were actually employed by someone and 80% were self-employed because you had a very agricultural economy. Then we went through that period of heavy industrialization where it went the other way. People moved to the cities. You had 20% of the people self-employed and 80% of the people, using very rough statistics here, employed by someone. Now we see it going back again. And you see that partially because we've already taken care of our basic manufacturing needs and we're expanding into other areas of human and economic activity. Most typified, I think, by the internet, like the opportunities that's created is amazing. People can work out of their homes when they never could before. So it's a double-edged sword. I can't really say, I'd like to see more open immigration, but I think we've got to fix our house at home too.
More open immigration, that's something I want to pick you back up on later. But for you watching, we'd like to know how you feel. Do you think it's unfair for a country to have certain expectations when it comes to job skills for the immigrants coming in? Let's go to you now, Mike, on line 2. Hi, Mike, you're on the line.
Hi, Christine, how you doing?
Fine, thank you.
I don't think it's unfair. I mean, if we do have a certain need, lately, for a while there was trades that we were lacking, and we didn't have enough people here that could do the trades. I mean, we eliminated the trades of our high schools and all that, where Canadians weren't learning trades. And I think if it's a real need for trades or something else, I think that's where we should focus to help immigrants. When they do come, they do have work to do. For a long time, our immigrants that came here exploded up to 900,000 just waiting lists to be processed, and a lot of people can't get jobs. So,
Mike, I'm glad you brought up that whole issue about skilled trades, because when the Conservatives first brought up this issue of skilled, and that's the magic word here, skilled, job skills, it perhaps does have something to do with what you just mentioned, Mike, about the skilled trades. And we're going to have to continue this line of thought here. When you look at the whole process of immigration, how do you see it, first of all? Because we've got refugees also coming into this country, and there are those, and that's fine. We need to be good to our neighbors, good to other people that are in need. But where do we draw the line here when it comes to forming even partnerships. For immigrants coming into the country, is it all about them? Is it also about the country? We got to strike some kind of a balance here. So I really want to hear your thoughts on it. Keep on calling in. We're going to go for a break. We'll be back after this. Stay tuned. Hello again. Welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line, continuing to talk about our first subject matter now. Once again, the headline is New Criteria Alarm Immigrants. Well, first and foremost, that article is not typical of, it doesn't explain anything. First of all, it makes it seem like all immigrants, which Canada is made up of immigrants, that all immigrants are upset because the Harper government virtually wants to see some skill coming into the country. From what I understand, there are a lot of immigrants out there that are pleased to see this, because when all is said and done, and I want to hear what your thoughts are on it, you heard both of our guests here, if we start taking in immigrants that have absolutely no skill, what is that going to mean for our country, and who's going to pay for it? I want to hear what you have to say on the phone lines. Let's go now to Myrn on line 4. Hello, Myrn, you're on the line.
Hello.
Hi, Myrn, go ahead.
I think this immigration thing will cost the country a lot of money, especially the refugees that come in. And some people come in as nannies, some people come in as taxi drivers, and then they claim that they were doctors and lawyers and they can't get jobs here. But when you put them to work, can they do the job? Nannies, after 2 years, they become landed immigrants. So where do we draw the line?
Myrn, I'm glad you called in. The key there is where do we draw the line, but I must say we do have legitimate doctors and lawyers coming in here. Some do have phony representations. We know this. You're always going to find bad apples everywhere. But the major problem, would the two of you agree, the problem is not so much, and I want you to reiterate it. a lot of immigrants coming in here with absolutely no skill. You do have just as much a problem with immigrants coming in here who are said to be overqualified and they just can't find jobs.
Sure, that's part of the labor
It's part of it.
monopoly I was talking about before.
But I'd like to
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
your feedback on the refugee issue here, because that is one issue. I'm not sure I've heard consensus even close on that one.
I think
What do you
that-
think our policy should be there?
Well, I think we should take in refugees if we can determine that they're legitimate refugees. That's always the issue. I mean,
Yes.
I don't think anyone would say, no, leave those people, if knowing that they're in threat of their life in another country or something like that, and say, no, you can't come in. But the issue, of course, always is that when we hear the type of people who do qualify for refugee status are not the kind of people we think of as refugees. They might just be people looking for work, people looking for a better opportunity. That may be
Exploiting
the
the
case.
system.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I completely agree with that.
Well, I didn't complete my thought entirely, but I'm not sure I agree with it either.
Complete it, Robert.
Because you said where to draw the line,
No,
and I
we're
haven't got
doing
to
it.
that
We try
point
to do
yet.
that here.
And to me, the basic thing is self-sufficiency, basically. You know what used to happen if you weren't self-sufficient? You had to have a sponsor who would guarantee you for a while
That's right.
that would make sure that you weren't a burden on the social system, and that opened the door to people who didn't qualify otherwise. Why we got rid of all those other mechanisms and stuff like that for a blanket approach to the whole immigration issue, I think that's part of where we went wrong, because we don't want to deal with individuals anymore. We want to deal with a whole country or a whole mass of identified individuals from a single group, and I don't think you can do that in immigration.
I'm just not sure that historically we can say there were a lot, historically perhaps 50, 60 years ago, 100 years ago, when there was a lot of unskilled labor came in and in fact provided a lot of labor that you see pictures of New York City or Toronto being built, and it was a lot of immigrant labor.
That's right.
And it was simply back hard labor and often very unskilled but needed, partly because of a relatively sparse population in a really big place. So there was a lot of highly promoted immigration then. I don't know that you can say over the last 30, 40 years that there is a large volume of totally unskilled labor just walking through the doors. I just don't see that. We've had the point system. You have to have a certain education. You cannot come in with communicable diseases or
What about the
criminal past
refugee
and so
stream,
on.
though? Do you think we're a little loose on that?
No, I don't, frankly.
You don't think so when it comes to
no.
our standards? Because Robert did mention the point that some refugees coming in here could be abusing the system.
And I just don't see
You don't
that
see that?
happening. I don't see it happening. I see more refugees sitting and waiting for 2 and 3 years in detention security centers, waiting for a refugee hearing simply because the backlog is there. Most refugees, if anything, from the stories I've heard through our church, through other situations, I work with a couple of homeless areas, most of the refugees that have come through, and if they've waited a long time, it's absolutely legitimate. They just simply can't get through the system because of the backlog. There aren't enough people. But the ones I have come into contact, none of
Are
them
they
just
skilled?
personally.
I'm curious.
Oh,
The ones
sure.
that they are skilled.
There's one fellow was a dean of studies at a school in Iraq, had to flee to Damascus, was being protected by the UNHCR. High Commission for Refugees had a protective certificate. They're just barely getting to start here, and it's been about 2 years. This guy is highly skilled and highly PhD, could teach at any of our universities, and he's just been sitting and waiting.
Okay, let's hear what you have to say on the phone lines now. Nancy on line 1. Hello, Nancy. You're on the line.
Hi, my name is Nancy, and I was thinking about the skills of the immigrant. I think it is important to address that things because it is a balance of the job market. There is a shortage in some skills, and we have to get it. And that's why they're asking us in the immigrant paper. Back home, I was a dentist, and at that time, they was needing a dentist when I came at 1997. But at 2000, they changed the system, and instead of just doing some tests the same as all other professionals, the pharmacists, the physicians, the accounting, the lawyer, all of them just doing some tests and get their license. For the dentist, we are not doing the same. We have to go through the university again, and they didn't give us any redemption of the subject. I was a dentist for 16 years, and even I have to pass the test to be dental assistant to get the license, or I have to go through 2 years in dental hygiene.
Nancy, thanks for calling in. Once again, we're hearing the other side, that many immigrants are coming here and they're feeling like they're overskilled
Well, that's what Allan
for
was
what
saying.
exactly
I
for
hear
what
that.
they're
And
That's what
actually
this
getting.
article is saying.
Well, the article is actually
You know-
criticizing that the government's placing a heavier emphasis on job skills, but it seems like several question marks there,
Yeah.
because the problem with the complaints I hear about most immigrants is that they're coming in skilled and they're not getting the jobs. So a little bit of a discrepancy there.
Disconnect, yeah.
Very much so. Let's go now to Cynthia on line 5. Hi, Cynthia. You're on the line.
I just wanted to make a point that a country should be run like a company, in that you need to hire people that meet your current needs as well as your future needs, which means that you have to very well define what your current and your future vision is.
Yes, Cynthia, well said. Should our country be run like a company? That was a really interesting thought.
Yeah,
Cynthia.
I
What do you
love
think?
that, and with all respect to Cynthia, I hope
You
our
don't think
country
so?
is never run like a company. If we are run on a bottom line, profit and loss, skills necessary.
What about, though, when we hit a snag in terms of our economics, like we're
Even
seeing
then,
now? Even then?
Companies live for a bottom line and providing a return to their shareholders, whether it's 1 or 1,000. A country needs to have a heart that is much broader than that and has open arms and has the
What about
ability
a company
to
with
care for
heart?
people.
What about a company with heart?
They don't exist.
Whoa.
Pardon me.
Robert, let's hear
I'm being
you.
a little facetious, but
yeah.
obviously.
I'll take it as that.
Good. 'Cause there are
Companies are in business to earn a profit. A government is not. A government exists to ensure justice
Exactly.
within a jurisdiction, and
Well, we
as
hope
such,
so.
that's what always scares me when I hear businessmen say, government should be run like a business. I understand what they mean. They mean that you should look after your affairs and you shouldn't spend more than you have.
Be responsible,
Sure,
of
that's
course.
a separate thing, but it's
course.
not a business. It doesn't work on the profit line. It's in the business of, quote, justice, which is not a profit-making enterprise, to say the least.
Totally agree with Bob.
And again, getting back to the overall immigration situation, you can either have a controlled immigration or a free immigration. And I know people are saying, well, the government should decide what kind of people we need in terms of skills. But a properly functioning market, that determination's already being made by the people who are immigrating, because they wouldn't go someplace if they didn't feel on some expectation that there was an opportunity there for them.
Okay, I'm going to phrase this differently, it's in keeping with Cynthia just mentioned here, but we're looking at what our elections that just went by. The greatest issue was economics. We're looking at the same situation in the U.S. with that $700 billion bailout. The situation there is economics. So the big question is, when you look at government, is the government not responsible for the economics of its nation and the economic situation regarding its citizens? So I'd like to hear what you think on that note. We're going to go for a break. We'll return after this. Stay tuned. Hello again. Welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. We're continuing with topic 1 because you're calling in, and you have some very interesting points to tell us. We'd love to hear from you. One of the interesting points we're still on has to do with the whole role of government, because the two of you say that you don't believe that a government should be run like a company. But if you look at the elections, the last federal elections we had, and even if you look at the elections going on in the U.S. now, the fundamental issue was economics, the economics of the citizens. How do you balance that? If you look at it particularly in this context of people coming into the country, surviving as a nation, the global economic market, what role should government have there?
Government's role should be to protect the marketplace, which means to protect the free market, which means to protect individuals in the market. It doesn't mean not to have rules and regulations. It means that each agent in the market is free to buy and sell the goods that they choose, not that someone else foists upon them through a monopoly, through a restriction, through forcing them to buy something through taxes that they wouldn't buy on their own. And basically, I would say that the government's number one rule with respect to any economy is to enforce the commandment, thou shalt not steal. And unfortunately, governments are among the greatest breakers of that commandment and are constantly, quote, redistributing wealth, using that euphemism to disguise the morality of what they're doing, and using altruism to justify it, and in the process hurting a lot of people, because the people who are...
You said a lot there. You said a lot there. Okay, how do you respond to it, Allan? Using altruism to justify it?
A couple of those things I would agree with, and protecting the market, I think, is exactly correct, but sometimes you have to protect the market from some of the marketeers. That's part of the reason for the economic debacle that's right now.
From criminals, yes.
No, not
from fraudsters?
Fraudsters, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean fraudsters who happen to be in CEO seats and taking massive bonuses, predatory lending practices, ending up in a credit crunch to the extent that we are right now. It's been disastrous, and a lot of it because of deregulation, not protecting the market from the very people that are using it to further their own interests at the expense of a lot of people.
Everybody says deregulation. That's not the case. It's just a different regulation. It was a regulation that took off all controls on having a legal reserve ratio.
You know what, you guys? We've now drifted, okay? Yes, it's related in that we're talking about the role of government. Should a government run a country like a market, well, like a business?
Government should be a referee,
we're talking
not a
about there
player.
should be a referee. Okay, that's fair. But that issue of deregulation here and regulation, that's something I'm going to have to definitely discuss at some point on Viewpoints. Let's go now to John on line 6. Hi, John. You're on the line.
Hi. Well, I do have a question, and my question is that why is it that we are only interested in getting skilled workers from other countries to help us build our economy? What about us also getting unskilled people to help them acquire skills to help themselves also? It shouldn't be a one-way benefit, I think, because it sounds kind of selfish to me. What do you think about that?
Do you agree with this? That it's selfish from that point of view?
Don't know about that, but I agree with which I said earlier. I said it shouldn't matter whether a person's skilled or unskilled as long as they have the ability to acquire a skill once they get here.
Yes, and an expectation that they will.
Or sustain themselves in some way. And everybody starts unskilled. My father immigrated to this country, quote, relatively unskilled, and that was back in the 50s, and his big problem in becoming a master plumber was all the other plumbers in the country who didn't want him to become one. Make sure that they chase you down, make sure you're with the right union.
But do you think it's selfish for a government to expect that you'll come here skilled? Do you think it's selfish? Will you call it that? Because here's my concern, that you open the door to people coming into this country. I think it's fair what Robert just said, with an expectation that they will acquire a skill. There's nothing selfish about it, because if you're coming into this country, you have no skill, you have no job, it's the rest of Canadians that are paying for you through welfare. You're calling that selfish? I call that fair. To expect when people come here that they're going to have something to offer. It's a two-way street.
Well, selfishness, if it's being implied in the sense I think it's being implied, means wanting something at someone else's expense without earning it yourself.
That's exactly, and that's what I'm opposing here.
Healthy self-interest is fine.
That's precisely
it's healthy self-interest.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go now to Catherine on line 4. Hello, Catherine. You're on the line.
Hello. My point is that, there's a huge desperate need for physicians right now. And, it would be ideal to train our own physicians, but at this point in time, there aren't a lot of young people who have the money without incurring student loans to go out and train to be a physician. And then they'll be left with crushing debt, at the end of their schooling. And in the meantime, while they're going to school, it's not filling our need for physicians. So if somebody applies to immigration that is a skilled physician, has gone through all their training in their own country, and, has, is willing to
you bring up a great point, but I'll tell you one thing, there's a lot of politics behind that one. Thanks for calling in. Let's go now to Tristan on line 5. Hi, Tristan, you're on the line.
Oh, hello?
Hi, Tristan, go ahead.
Yes, I'd just like to say that a few things. It's not about the government being run like a business per se. It's about the government protecting liberty and property and free choices.
Well said. Well said.
We've seen that this principle leads to better results than having the government control everything and trying to run everything. With the issue of the doctor that the previous caller said, this is a perfect example. The doctor issue comes from the government too much controlling the doctor regulation and putting a cap actually on the number of doctors being trained. If we had more of a market allowing doctors to charge for their own services, whereas instead of getting the government to pay all doctors, no matter how their performance is, no matter how well they do their work.
Tristan, I want to thank you for calling in with your points. You got a great point here when it comes to, saved you a lot of work. I think it took some of our ideas here, at least from Robert anyway.
From
so
Robert.
thanks for calling.
I agree with
Robert
everything,
in this
Tristan. Let's stay in there.
We're going to have to go for a break shortly, but I'll tell you what, we're going to move on to actually subject matter number 2, because I want you to start thinking and getting your thoughts rolling before we move on to the break here. And the second topic is, and this is something that just keeps on coming up in the news over and over again. Here you have an article it was a column written by Lauren Gunther. Handgun bans don't prevent murder. Well, the title basically says it all. He doesn't believe in that because he's using in this article Chicago as the greatest example of how it failed. In his opinion here. He's citing some relevant stats, though, that Chicago is now the greatest area in the U.S., city that has perhaps the strictest, the strictest handgun bans, yet they're the new murder capital of the United States. So how do you explain that one when you look at it? Handgun bans, isn't it just a bunch of political game playing here with all these people? I mean, what about the knives? I mean, in the last couple of weeks, we saw 2 women in the GTA in Toronto stabbed. We saw another 14-year-old, and this one really touched me, walking through a field, going home from school, stabbed to death. We're seeing violence with knives as well. I mean, it's endless. Violence is endless, but somebody's operating that gun here.
Nobody is going to be able to prevent violence altogether. That's just a given. It's part of society. It's unfortunate. It's tragic. But to me, it is, Mr. Gunther's article was almost illogical to me.
That was illogical to you? Why?
It is.
Why, Allan?
I don't see any point. If it's bad enough that there are that many, if you're having that much gun control and you're still having that many murders, then abandon gun control and say, oh, well, that didn't work. Let's just try something else. So the murder rate skyrockets. It soars.
No, I don't believe in abandoning it altogether, no.
No, of course not. But even
I think
loosening
where has that ever happened?
I don't think he's advocating for a total just banning it, but he's saying that
it doesn't work?
For politicians to keep on saying banning guns is the answer.
Fact, the evidence is quite the contrary. In the United States, several United States, which I've done a lot of research on, have reversed their stands on gun bans and gone the other way, and said you now have the right to conceal weapons, and murder and particularly assault and theft is dropped by something like 66% in some jurisdictions.
That's interesting.
The city of Kennesaw, Georgia, made it mandatory because it had such a crime wave to have people own guns, licensed guns. Again, it dropped. This was back in the 80s.
So do you believe we should drop it?
Gun control is only effective with law-abiding, otherwise crime-free citizens. Anybody who's out to break a law is going to be laughing at a gun control law, just like the druggies all laugh at drug laws. It's a joke.
So here we must go for a break, but here we have it. Allan, do you believe we need tighter gun controls,
Absolutely.
more gun bans? Okay, so here we have Allan believing we need more gun control, Robert believing we need less, and I kind of like what we have already because from what we're seeing, hey, it's not the criminals that are going to obey the bans, but at the same time, does that mean we throw it all away? We want to hear what you think here. We're going to go for a break. We'll return after this. Stay tuned. Hello again, and welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line, talking about our second story. Do you think, the question to you, that gun bans are the answer to reducing crime in the main urban centers of our country? Let's go now to Andy on line 1. Hi, Andy. You're on the line.
Yeah, hi, Christine, and hello, guests. Anyway,
Hello, Andy.
all I can say is, like Canada has always had, one of the strictest gun laws in the world, with the exception of the UK. All we need, is to reinforce the laws we already have and have absolute truth in sentencing. If you're caught with a gun and you're sentenced to the max, you do the max.
Andy, thanks for calling in with that, because that happens to be where I stand. And I was talking to you, the two of you, during the break, because, Robert, you believe in just throwing away the gun bans because you're saying that when you look at the evidence that it really doesn't help anyway. So you're for less restrictions. Allan is for more than we already have. And I agree with you, Andy. I kind of like what we have. Keep going here.
I would suggest that what we have is sort of pulling the wool over our heads. It's like the invisible hand of the marketplace. When governments create a job and build a factory, let's say, everybody can see it. It's there, it's visible. What they don't see is all the jobs lost that were, where the government took the money from those people to build it. Same thing with gun control. We can see the victims of crime. We can see the victims of a murder or mayhem. But what we never see are the countless people who have defended themselves, prevented crimes, that doesn't get in the paper. And good news never does it? I have an ex-father-in-law who lived in Miami and probably saved his life 3 times because he was carrying a handgun.
So you believe in the right to bear arms?
Well, I have never owned a gun, don't intend to own a gun, but I believe I have a right to own one if I feel threatened enough in some element of self-defense. But the issue is this: are good people allowed to own guns, and does that make them bad just because they own a gun? And the last caller was suggesting, you own a gun, you should go to jail. Well, what you've just done is you've equated a good person with a bad person.
Well, not if they do it according to the restrictions we already have in this country.
A restriction,
and I think that's what
doesn't make it
if it's registered. But I must say, because I don't ever want to go down as believing in the gun registry. That is I shouldn't say I agree with the system the way it is today, because here's what happened to the gun registry, and I'm laughing because it's so absurd. It was initially calculated in the mid-90s to be $119 million. Well, according to documents that were obtained by the CBC, that project has now exceeded $20 billion. Yes, not million, $billion. How ridiculous is that?
I don't think anybody can defend that.
But at the same time, and I'm putting this out to you here, because here's my concern with right to bear arms when you just throw away all the rules here. And I'm talking about domestics here.
Why does everybody think it's throwing away rules?
Okay, here's the problem with the right to bear arms, and you're not going to agree with me there if you do believe in that right. But what about domestic situations where violence escalates within a household, tempers are flaring, and that passion gets
That's the visible
up,
we're talking
and then
about again.
Concept of affordance. The gun's there, a spouse or somebody living in the house pulls it on another, and I'm a little uneasy about that. That's my concern.
So you're saying that because of that, someone like my father-in-law should have died 3 times over?
No, I am certainly not saying that.
That would have been the price.
But you're looking at numbers here. What I'd like you to do is if you could find stats with how many people, which you may not be able to do, how many people defended themselves using a gun in the States versus how many people got killed because they owned a gun.
Do have stats
that would be
like
fair.
that.
And what are the stats? And I'm counting on you at this point.
Well, I don't have them with me, but I've talked. But the police do collect them, particularly from store owners, variety store clerks, people working in dangerous places where people might rob them, and to leave people defenseless is, to me, such a fundamental dehumanizing thing to say that you can't. We're at a point in our country.
But you could own a gun in a state in Canada, though. You could own a gun in Canada if you go through the registration process. You could own a gun. I'm not advocating, and I know that you do, Allan, for more gun restrictions. I do not advocate for that either.
We should be, if we're going to register anything, we should be registering owners, not guns. But that's
I agree.
Okay,
but the owner's there with the
strict
guns.
registration.
But you know what happens? I knew one guy. He died last year, but he was running gun shows, and he had to deal with a lot of guns because he was dealing with trading and selling. So here's one guy who had to deal with so many regulations. It was unbelievable. That's where I learned a lot about gun control. It has nothing to do with keeping us safer, that's for sure. It's an out-and-out attack on innocent people. That's all it is.
The whole philosophical idea that somehow we have a right to have a gun in order to protect
That's not
ourselves.
the right. The right is to self-defense. If no one else had a gun and nothing like a gun existed, I was once asked, should we have a right to own a nuclear weapon in your basement, right? And I said, well, the answer is yes, if your neighbor has one. Okay, and that's a facetious answer, and
we're going to hold you on that
one, and it's
facetious
not
answer, okay? Food for thought. We're going to go for a break. We'll return after this. Stay tuned. Hello again, and welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. So, how do you feel about having tighter restrictions on owning guns, having less of them? Do you like them the way they are? You had something you wanted to reply to Robert here. I'm going to get you on the phone line shortly, though, so be patient with me.
Right, I'll be fairly quick about this. Philosophically, what Bob mentioned just prior to the break about
the nuclear thing in
the
the
nuclear
basement.
thing. If your neighbor has one, then you have a right to have one in your basement. And I know, obviously not literally,
right.
Sure. But if I just put it, let's back it right off to a 22. If your neighbor has a 22, then you should have a 22, or you should have the right to have a 22. To me, that just increases the potential for danger and for harm to come to one of those people if they both do. Does the other one just assume the one's coming after them? If the person has a gun over here, and now I want one, to me it just doubles, it increases the opportunity for, one will just say, okay, I might as well take a shot.
Now, see, if my neighbor has a .22, I wouldn't say I have a right to one too. I would say I already have a right to one because my neighbor's got one. He can't have a right that I don't have, otherwise
And
it
as
wouldn't
it
be a
is,
right.
the criminals have that
And I
because they're
don't
not going to
think- and I
obey.
don't
None of
think-
us have.
And I don't think either one of them should have a right to have either one.
But you know what the
Okay, I
problem
got a
is?
question for you
So
then.
what's
What
that?
would you do to them? What would be the proper penalty? Okay, you come into my house, you find a handgun there. How many years should I go to jail and for what?
If you shouldn't have that gun, and it's illegal to have a handgun, and there's no purpose in it that you're
Well,
not
no
a police
purpose you
officer.
can see. But I'm not
Exactly.
going to tell you my purpose, but you tell
Well,
me
if
how,
can't-
you
if
tell me how long I should have to go to
If you can't tell
jail.
me why you have a deadly weapon in your house, then I would
Well, you know
say
what? While the two of them
something.
try to figure out who's going to
I
say
don't
what,
know
we're going to hear what
exactly
you and the
what
phone
was.
lines have to
But
say.
should you be
Ken,
punished? Yes.
on line 8. Hi, Ken. You're on the line.
Hi. I just came back from New York City. I was there for a month. They're giving people $200 all over New York, Manhattan, and the boroughs right now for handing in guns. I was involved with organized crime for over 20 years, and specifically the crack cocaine underworld, and all over North America. I also attended Concordia University. I was friends with Michael Hogbin when his father was shot.
Well, you know what, Ken? You're hitting a nerve with me here because I have an uncle. You'll know his name, Douglas. Okay, Professor Douglas. He was one of the professors shot at Concordia as well.
I was friends with Keith when his dad was shot, and and Keith and his brother got the whole petition rolling that eventually got 1 million signatures. I later on got into drug trafficking from university and all that, and hung out with some fairly elite people.
Ken, would you like to see more of a gun ban, more restrictions on banning guns, or would you like?
Yes, but I for one am a pit bull owner, and my dog has never bitten anybody, and I think it comes
So, Ken,
down
what are you
to
advocating for? Do you want less or more controls? That's what we need to know, the bottom line.
control. It's the judges, the judges. I mean, it's too easy. First of all, there are police in this city that carry guns that smoke crack after work. So I mean, let's start profiling people properly. Let's start addressing the matter adequately. Let's start testing
Ken,
people.
thanks for calling in. Let's go now to Jack on line 6. Hello, Jack. You're on the line.
Hi. First, I'd like to say that I'm not an advocate of gun control. I've seen the stats, and the stats speak for themselves. It doesn't actually work all that well. But I think we should also ask the causes of why there's so much crime in that area. And one thing that surprised me is that in the U.S., statistically, and the Justice Department has said as well, blacks are disproportionately more likely, more than twice likely, to do the most violent crimes, but they're only 10% of the population. It's way too disproportionate to their population. There's more black on white crime than white on black crime. There's more black on black crime. Why is there such a high disproportionate rate?
Jack, I hear you. Thanks for calling in, but I'm going to add something to this. When you're looking at statistics, you can't argue the facts. We look at what's going on with the violence in the GTA, and there are many black people that I know working within the black community trying to deal with it. You've got a problem, yes. The last thing you want to do is target people, promote racism, but I hear what you're saying, because if you do have a problem, we need to confront it, perhaps get to the root of what it is that's propelling that problem, and not looking for cheap solutions like, come on, let's tighten up restrictions for
Gun
guns.
control is the cheap solution, and it
I
also
know, but I agree with you on that. We don't need more.
blames an object for the responsibility of the individual, and therefore reduces the individual's responsibility, which I see as a huge detriment to society. I think individuals should be held responsible for their actions. The fact that a person owns a gun or doesn't own a gun is irrelevant, as long as he doesn't use it in the commission of a crime. Then it becomes relevant. Then you can have all kinds of extra penalties you might want.
But that almost goes to what I'm saying. So the person has the gun, we wait for them to use it, and then we say, how come they had a gun in the first place? How did they get that gun to get? Well, we didn't do anything about them landing there in the first place.
You know how many millions of people have owned guns in this country?
Oh, absolutely.
How many of them, as a percentage, can you actually say fit your profile that you just defined, it's going to come out and attack you?
Criminals are smuggling them in, and that's something we need to consider.
One
but-
thing, and that is,
yes.
I'm talking about handguns, not long guns, rifles, shotguns, and so on.
Are the criminals going to obey these bans, though? I mean, we already have restrictions.
No, of course
They're
not.
already disobeying it, and that's food for thought, too. We're going to have to go for a break. We'll move on to topic 3 after this. Stay tuned. Hello again. Welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. The third topic that we're talking about, let's take a look at it up on the screen, and it's entitled, A Not So Sweet Idea. We're not going to highlight any specific schools here, but you do have some drives going on that the candy that we have for Halloween, that afterward we send this candy off overseas to the less fortunate children. Of course they're going to like the taste of candy, who doesn't? But some critics are saying it's not a good thing sending this candy off because candy's bad for you. Plus, a lot of these kids have problems digesting it. Now, we normally go to our guests first, but Julian in line 2, you've been waiting to talk about this topic, and I'm curious why here. Julian, you're on the line.
Thanks, Christine. It's Jillian, actually. My problem with the whole idea of them not allowing this to happen is that these kids already have a lot of problems, and this would be a sweet escape from their problems just for a shake or two, because then, you know, they get to experience a little bit of joy. And at this point, I mean, I don't celebrate Halloween myself, but I think that if you can bring some joy, I mean, yes, it is junk food, but please give them some happiness.
You got a good point there, Julian. Thanks for calling in. Now, let's start with you on this one, Robert. What do you have to say about that?
I agree with that sentiment, but there may be another factor involved here. Quite often, when North America sends aid to Africa and other impoverished countries, they run into problems out of their goodwill, as happened once with powdered milk that they thought would be a good product for people because it's good here, because our water is good here. And you mix that powdered milk with the local water there, and all of a sudden they were having all sorts of bowel problems and illness problems out of the good, you know, that came from our help, really. So you have to be careful. I mean, as long as, and if you're talking about kids who are otherwise malnutritioned, I don't know that giving them candy is the best thing, but if they're not at that point, I would agree with the caller that it's just an extra treat.
So you don't see any harm in the extra treat?
It's not the staple. No, assuming that...
I mean, they're not living off of it, okay? We're not having these kids live off the candy.
And that may be part of the problem in my mind. I would not want to just clamp down on something that seems so fun. It sounds so Grinch-like to do that. But to take over a little bit of candy to someone and say, here, you can have that, and that's it for the year, maybe it may have one sense or one side of it saying, oh, I feel good for that moment, and another feeling very, very deprived, instead of a longer-term solution of some sort. It's a warm and fuzzy that's hard to say no to.
Yes, but one critic says, at best, it's a token gesture. At worst, it's a waste of time. And you know what? I don't think that either, because you got to applaud the kids in the schools that are still learning the art of giving, if you want to put it that way.
It's not like they're making special trips and special shipments.
No,
for
and
this.
they're not filling these kids with candy. It's once a year.
Sure.
And by the time it gets distributed, how much is it?
I really would be afraid of the disappointment factor. It's like, oh, this is great. When do I get the next? Oh, you don't.
That, you got to point with that one. That
with.
Disappointment factor could be a big one, yeah. And that's all the time we have for today.
Oh, speaking of disappointment.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you again next time. I'm Christine Williams, and from all of us, thank you for watching.